Hello again. In the previous tutorial we were looking at ways of taking the solid pixels on a layer and converting them into selections and then using that selections to apply to other layers. In this tutorial I want to expand on that technique a little bit and show you how to take objects on the same layer and convert them into selections and then manipulate them. So to get started, we've got our 800 by 600 pixel empty document here. I'm going to start by creating an empty blank layer by clicking on the new layer icon in the layers palette down at the bottom here, and I'm going to draw some objects on this layer. And we'll be again very simple about this. I've got the Marquee tool, square Marquee tool selected here, and I'm going to draw a square on this empty layer. And I'm going to fill it with the foreground color, which at the moment is a sort of magenta color, by holding down the Alt or Option key and then hitting the backspace, delete backspace. So there we go. I'm going to drop that selection and I'm going to go over to the Marquee tool and choose the Elliptical Marquee tool here. And I'm going to hold down my Shift key so I get a nice round circle and draw a round circle. And I'm going to change the color here to something different. Let's choose green this time, and again Alt or Option backspace to fill it with green. And finally, just to finish off here, let's choose the Polygonal Lasso tool down here, and we'll draw a rough triangular shape here, and we'll fill this one with a different color. We'll choose maybe blue this time. Okay. So we have a blue, a green, and a magenta shape on the same layer. Now, you'll often have situations like this where you have various things that are on the same layer, the way these objects are, but you need to rearrange them separately, or you need to move them, or you need to juggle with them in some way. You could cut each one out and put it on its own layer and then move them around on their own layer, but you don't have to do that. That's not strictly necessary. All you need to do is to convert them into a selection that you can move around. Right. So the simplest way of doing this is to choose a selection tool. Let's choose the Marquee tool here, which is probably the simplest of all, and draw around the object you want to move. So start over here and draw a sort of rough rectangular selection around them. Now at the moment that's not affecting the layer at all. I can move that around. It's not actually interacting with the pixels in any way. In order to make it interact with the pixels on the layer, particularly with those purple pixels or those magenta pixels, all I need to do is to hold down the Command or Control key on my keyboard and then hit one of the arrow keys. Now you have 4 arrow keys on your keyboard, up, down, right and left. It doesn't matter which one you hit. I'm going to hit the up one, and the minute I do that, watch what happens. The selection snaps around the solid pixels here, and that is now a selection that allows me to move that particular part of the layer wherever I want it to go. So I can rearrange things any way I want them to be. I can do the same with a green circle, hold on the controller command, hit an arrow key, and I can move that part around. I can do it the same with the blue triangle. So a simple technique, but very, very useful. It just allows you to arrange things on a layer. Now, let's say we want to take these off this layer and we want to put them on their own layers, which is another scenario that crops up quite a lot. Again, first of all I need to select the thing I want to move, so I'm going to draw around the green one, hold down the Control or Command key and hit my little arrow key to snap around it. Now in order to move it onto its own layer, it depends very much whether I want it to copy it or to cut it. And the difference is this. If I hold down the Command or Control key, as we did in the last tutorial, and hit the J key, it jumps it onto a new layer. But what it's in fact done is it's copied it onto a new layer. It's still on the layer underneath. Okay. Now that might be what I want, but if I want to literally cut it onto a new layer, so I don't want to keep the layer underneath, I just want it on its own layer, I need to add one more key to my keyboard shortcut. So let's try it one more time. Hold on, draw around it, hold down the Command key, snap around it, and this time instead of doing Command J or Control J, I'm going to do Shift Command or Control J. and this is the difference. It's now being cut off the layer underneath. It's not on the layer underneath, but it is on its own layer, and I can similarly separate the magenta square by making sure I'm on the right layer first of all, snapping around it, and then Shift Command J, and now I have all three objects on their own layers. So that's another scenario that crops up a lot, where you want to take something off a layer and distribute it onto its own layer. Right, now another scenario that sometimes happens is if you have an object or a drawing or something you've done, let's use the green circle as an example here, and you want to use it in multiple instances. So for example, you might want to draw green bubbles all over the screen for whatever reason. You could again make copies of this layer by dragging it down and dropping it on the new layer icon, and then move each bubble around on its own layer. That would be certainly one way of doing it, but you'll end up with a lot of layers over here. A much simpler way of doing it is again to use the technique we've used so far. Draw around it, hold on the controller command, snap around it, so you've now got it selected on its own layer, and this time duplicate it by holding down two keys at the same time. This is a very, very useful technique in all kinds of occasions. It crops up. So the two keys you need to hold down, again the command key, and guess what, the alt key or option key. And the minute I do that, you notice I press the two of them together, I get this little double-headed arrow appearing, a white and a black arrow together. And that's telling me that if I move my mouse now, I won't just be moving the object, I'll be actually copying it. So for example, if I drag down towards the right, I'm actually creating a copy of it. If I keep my fingers down, I can keep creating multiple copies of the same object on the same layer. Okay? So that is another very useful instance of that. A variation on that is if you want to create, for example, if you're drawing buttons on a website design or something, you want to create objects that line up with each other. Let's say the square here, for example. I'm drawing around it, I'm going to snap around it. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. See what happened with that? I'm actually still on the green layer, so I picked up the green layers. I'll drop that, click on the proper layer, and do that one more time. I've snapped around my purple square here, and now I want to create multiple copies, but I want them to line up with the original one. Again, I hold down my two keys to get my double-headed arrow, but this time I also hold down the Shift key. And what that does in this situation is it constrains the drag, so I can only drag in a perfect horizontal or vertical manner. In this case, horizontal. Yes, I actually can do it vertically as well. So I could start down here. It won't let me move to the left or right, though. It has to be perfectly horizontal or vertical. So I'm letting go here. I'm going to move horizontally, and I'm going to move up one. And you'll notice that these will be aligned with each other perfectly. And I can keep doing that. And of course, if I was doing this for real, much cleverer thing to do than doing what I'm doing would be once I've done 4 of them to select all 4 like that, and then drag 4 at a time, and that way I could make sure that I have less trouble lining them up with each other. So that addition of that Shift key to the Option and Command keyboard shortcut makes sure that when you constrain when you're dragging something, you're constraining it to a straight line, horizontal or vertical. So that again can be very useful. A situation where that particularly is useful is if you're trying to copy or clone something. For example, you might have a window in a wall, and you want to clone a piece of wall over the window to make it disappear. Instead of using the cloning tool, which would work, but it would mean you'd be clicking all over the place, you can simply grab a piece of the wall, select it, and then holding down the Alt and Command key together, drag that piece of the wall on top of the window, and it disappears.